All right, let's dive into this. We're looking at zero-shot time series forecasting. And specifically, this new model, it's called Sundial. And it's making waves, especially when we start thinking about finance.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating how Sundial is trying to completely change the game. It's not just about, small improvements. It's about a whole new foundation for how we think about predicting time series, particularly in areas like stock price forecasting.
And we're going right to the source for this. We've got the research paper right here. It's called Sundial, a family of highly capable time series foundation models. It's pretty dense, but don't worry. We're going to help you navigate all the technical jargon, and we'll get to the good stuff.
Exactly. We'll break down what makes Sundial different from other models you might have heard of, like Informer or Crossformer. You can think of us as your cheat sheet to understanding this new model.
We'll even get into the nitty-gritty, like how much computing power do you actually need to train and use this model? Because, I mean, that's a big question for anyone who wants to put Sundial into action.
And of course, no deep dive would be complete without talking about the challenges. So we'll also be taking a look at the hurdles that Sundial still faces, especially when it comes to predicting something as dynamic and unpredictable as the stock market.
So first things first, what exactly is Sundial and why should we care?
Well, time series forecasting, it's been around forever, right? But the holy grail is always trying to get more accuracy, especially in finance. I mean, who wouldn't want to get a clearer glimpse into the future of the stock market?
Yeah, that's the dream, right? So how does Sundial fit into all of this?
So Sundial is what we call a family of foundation models. And this basically means that they're pre-trained on massive data sets, and they can be adapted to a variety of tasks. And what's special about Sundial is that it's built specifically for time series data, which makes it a potentially super powerful tool for things like, stock price prediction. It's like having a specialized tool that's designed for a very specific job.
Okay, so Sundial is designed for time series data, and it's a foundation model. That means it's pre-trained. But how is it actually different from other models out there? Like, what's the secret sauce that makes Sundial stand out?
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting. So a lot of the time series foundation models out there, they aren't truly generative. They just spit out single point predictions. And let's be honest, that can be kind of risky when you're dealing with the uncertainty of the future.
So they're basically saying, this is what's going to happen, and that's it. No room for error or, unexpected events. Seems a bit bold, especially with something like finance where things are changing all the time.
Exactly. And Sundial takes a different approach. It uses what's called generative modeling, a technique inspired by how large language models work.
Wait, language models? I thought we were talking about like numbers and trends, not words and sentences.
Yeah, so it's about the underlying principle, right? So instead of giving you just one definitive prediction, Sundial actually generates multiple probable predictions. Think of it like exploring different branches of possible futures, each with its own likelihood.
So instead of saying like this stock will be worth $100 tomorrow, Sundial might say there's a 60% chance it'll hit $100, a 20% chance it'll reach $105, and so on. So it's giving you like a range of possibilities, not just one fixed point.
Precisely. And that makes the forecasts way more robust and nuanced, which is really, really crucial when we're dealing with something like financial data. It's a roller coaster, right? And Sundial, it acknowledges that uncertainty. It's not just a straight line.
Okay, yeah, I'm starting to see why this is a big deal. But how does Sundial actually do this? Like, what's the magic happening behind the scenes?
Well, you got to remember that time series data is continuous, right? It's like a river flowing. And Sundial, it embraces that. It uses something called continuous tokenization.
Continuous what now? Can you break that down for us non-technical folks?
Yeah, so imagine you're analyzing chunks of that flowing river instead of individual drops. That's basically what continuous tokenization does. It looks at segments of the data and preserves the natural flow of time.
So it's not like chopping up the data into tiny pieces and analyzing them in isolation, which makes sense, especially when you think about how interconnected everything is in financial markets.
Exactly. And that's a big difference from models like Chronos, which they kind of treat time series data more like a language, breaking it down into individual words or tokens. But Sundial takes a more holistic view.
So Sundial sees the whole forest instead of getting lost in the trees. Okay, that makes sense.
Right. And by respecting that continuous nature of time series data, Sundial can potentially make much more accurate long-term forecasts, which is really valuable in the world of finance.
This all sounds pretty impressive.
Yeah.
But let's talk about practicality for a second. How much computing power does it actually take to train and use Sundial? Are we talking like supercomputer levels here?
Well, to train a minimum viable sundial model from scratch, yeah, that does require a good amount of horsepower. We're talking like clusters of high-performance GPUs. But the good news is that the researchers have released pre-trained versions, and those are much more accessible.
Okay, that's a relief.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't need my own personal data center just to play around with this thing. But what about making predictions with the pre-trained model, what they call inference?
Even with pre-trained models, running inference, especially with, complex financial data, is still going to require some decent hardware. You got to remember that Sundial is generating multiple probable predictions, not just like a single output.
Right. So maybe not a supercomputer, but definitely not something I'd be running on my old laptop. Fair enough.
But think about the potential payoff. If Sundial can deliver on this, promise of more accurate and nuanced forecasts, even a small investment in hardware could be nothing compared to the insights you gain.
That's a great point. Now, I know no model is perfect. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the challenges facing Sundial. What are some of the potential stumbling blocks here, especially when it comes to financial forecasting?
One of the biggest challenges is that Sundial, like a lot of deep learning models, can be a bit of a black box. It's not always clear why it's making certain predictions.
So even if Sundial gives you like a spot-on forecast, you might not actually know the reasoning behind it. That seems like it would be kind of hard to fully trust, especially when we're talking about, making real financial decisions with real money.
Right, exactly. And that lack of interpretability, it can be a big hurdle to actually getting people to use it. I mean, investors and traders, they want to understand the logic behind a prediction. They don't just want to blindly follow, whatever the model spits out, no matter how accurate it might seem.
Yeah, it's like being told to buy a certain stock but not knowing why. You'd want some kind of justification, some insight into the, thought process.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why researchers are working on making Sundial more transparent, so that users can understand the why behind the predictions. And they're doing this by exploring things like attention visualization and feature importance analysis, which can really help shed light on how Sundial is processing information and, coming to its forecasts.
So it's kind of like lifting the curtain and giving users a peek behind the scenes of like Sundial's decision-making process.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. Are there any other challenges that kind of stand out, particularly ones that might impact how well it performs on, financial time series?
Well, one challenge lies in the nature of financial data itself, right? It's just inherently noisy. It's
Yeah.
chaotic. You've got all these factors influencing it. Global events, economic indicators, investor sentiment, even like social media trends these days.
Yeah, it's not like predicting the weather, where you have, relatively consistent patterns and a limited number of variables. The financial markets, I mean, that's a whole different animal.
It really is. And that's where Sundial's generative approach could be both, a good thing and a bad thing. Because, yeah, its ability to generate multiple probable predictions, that acknowledges the uncertainty of the markets, which is great. But it also raises the question of, well, how do we interpret and act on all these diverse forecasts?
Right, so it's kind of like a double-edged sword. You have this model that's more realistic about how unpredictable finance is. But then you're faced with, well, how do I sift through all these potential outcomes? And how do I make decisions when I have all these possibilities?
Exactly. And this challenge, it becomes even bigger when we're talking about zero-shot forecasting,
Yeah.
where the model has to make predictions on data it's never even seen before. And in finance, I mean, new trends and events can pop up all the time. So this ability to adapt and generalize is super important.
So for Sundial to really succeed in finance, it needs to be more than just accurate. It needs to be robust, adaptable, and transparent.
Right. It's a tall order.
It really is. But the potential rewards, I mean, they could be huge.
Oh, absolutely. If Sundial can overcome these challenges, it could completely change how we approach financial forecasting and risk management. Imagine, investors could use Sundial to not only predict market movements, but they could also understand that range of outcomes and make better decisions based on, their own risk tolerance.
That's a really powerful thought. It's like having this super sophisticated financial advisor that can not only see into the future, but can also help you navigate all the complexity with more confidence, more clarity.
Absolutely. And that's where Sundial's ability to capture complex distributions of data is so important. It's not just about predicting, the average outcome. It's about understanding that whole spectrum, the best case, the worst case, and everything in between.
Okay, so we've talked about some of the inherent challenges with financial data and the need for interpretability. Are there any other hurdles that the researchers are actively working on, especially those that might affect Sundial's zero-shot forecasting powers in the world of finance?
Yeah, one of the big areas of research right now is scalability because, like we talked about, even the pre-trained Sundial models, they still need pretty decent hardware to run inference. And as those financial data sets just keep getting bigger and more complex, making Sundial more computationally efficient, I mean, that's super important. To really use zero-shot forecasting, you need a model that can handle massive amounts of data.
It's like a constant race, right, between model complexity and how feasible it is to actually compute. You want something powerful enough to handle the nuances of financial markets, but you also need something that can run on like real-world hardware. You don't want to need a supercomputer.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's that challenge of the upward trends. Like we talked about earlier, Sundial, at least right now, it sometimes struggles to predict those, big jumps in stock prices.
Which, let's be honest, those are the trends everyone wants to be able to predict, right? Missing out on those could be a deal breaker.
Yeah, for sure. And this difficulty with upward trends, it could be a few things. It could be the way Sundial is trained, the data sets it's learning from, or maybe even some limitations with the whole generative modeling approach. It's something researchers are still trying to figure out, how to make Sundial better in that area.
So back to the drawing board. But even with those limitations, it sounds like Sundial is really pushing the boundaries of what's possible with time series forecasting, especially when you think about how complex financial data is.
Absolutely. And what's really exciting is that Sundial is still being developed. And even with those challenges, its performance on those early benchmarks, especially in zero-shot forecasting, has been really promising. But like we've been saying, real-world financial data, that's a whole other challenge.
It's a wild world out there.
It is. And this is where Sundial's unique architecture could really shine. You see, unlike models like Informer or Crossformer, which rely on attention mechanisms to process data, Sundial uses that continuous tokenization to capture the flow of time in a more natural way. And that means it can handle those long-range dependencies and complex patterns in financial data much better.
So it's like Sundial has this built-in understanding of how interconnected and fluid the financial markets are. It's not just looking at individual data points. It's seeing the whole picture, the ebb and flow of the system.
Exactly. And then you add that generative approach on top of it. It brings in a whole other layer of sophistication.
Yeah.
Because by generating multiple probable predictions, Sundial isn't trying to find one right answer, which, like we said, is pretty much impossible in finance. It's giving you a range of plausible scenarios, each with its own likelihood, so you can make a more informed decision.
It's like Sundial is saying, hey, I can't tell you exactly what's going to happen, but here's some things to think about, and here's how likely they are. Now you, the human, can use your own judgment and knowledge to make the best decision.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And that shift in thinking, from needing certainty to embracing uncertainty, I think that's the biggest impact Sundial could have on the world of finance.
That's a big thought.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. Based on all the research you've done on Sundial and what it can do, where do you see this technology going in the next few years? What's your expert prediction?
Honestly, I think we're just scratching the surface of what Sundial can do. Right now, the focus is on prediction. But imagine if we could use this technology not just to forecast markets, but to actively manage risk, optimize portfolios, even maybe anticipate things like market crashes.
Okay, now you're talking. How would that work?
Well, think about it. Sundial can create these different scenarios of the future, right? What if we could use those scenarios to stress test investment portfolios? We could simulate how different portfolios would perform under various market conditions, all based on Sundial's predictions.
So you'd essentially be running simulations to see which portfolios could handle those different financial storms, all thanks to what Sundial is telling you.
Exactly. It'd be like having a financial crystal ball, but instead of showing you just one future, it shows you many. So you can make smarter decisions, more strategic decisions.
So less of a forecasting tool and more of a risk management powerhouse.
Exactly. And that's just one application. I think Sundial has the potential to change how we make decisions in any field that uses time series data. Finance, economics, healthcare, climate modeling, you name it.
Well, you've given us a lot to think about. For all of you listening, if you're interested in learning more about Sundial and how it could be used, the research paper we talked about is called Sundial, a family of highly capable time series foundation models. And it's available online. It's a little technical, but it's got all those exciting details.
It's a good read.
It is. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. And thanks to everyone for joining us on this deep dive into Sundial. We hope you enjoyed exploring the future of time series forecasting with us. Until next time.